Hello and welcome to the Weekly Sceptic, episode 88. I'm Nick Dixon here with Free Speech Duracell Bunny Toby Young here at the Westminster Podcast Studio with Alex and Andrew, bringing you all this beautiful podcast magic to your eyes and ears. And coming up this week, Ofcom sanctions GB News, the tragic helicopter crash in Iran, tragic depending on who you ask, and big political change in Holland, plus of course peak woke and extra content for our special subscribers on basemedia.org. But Toby, we have to probably issue a quick apology. I'm just going to start my watch. But it's a half sincere apology for missing last week, because I say half sincere because so many people have tweeted me, where's Weekly Sceptic? They don't say, are you okay, Nick? You know what I mean? I'm just expected to just churn it out forever for almost 2 years, just this thankless task, whether rain or shine, even if I'm dying. I was ill. I barely ate for over a week, lost 5.5 pounds, have put 3 of it back on, feeling a bit better. Went down to a health centre opened by David Lammy. Just went there at like 10 p.m. because Bupa told me I had to. It was a complex mixture of private and public health and me thinking I was dying. I just basically couldn't eat for a week and I had stomach problems. But I always have stomach problems, but it was worse. I know the audience loved to hear about this. But the point is, everyone kept tweeting me, where's Weekly Sceptic? I'm sorry that I'm not a machine. I mean, I've only ever missed one the whole time we've been doing it, which was at Christmas when you and the producers weren't really around. So I even did Christmas one year, and these people are like, where is it? I mean, I apologize sincerely to the paid subscribers because they're paying for a product. The free subscribers, I apologize to an extent. Is that fair?
That's fair. I mean, it was. I think we did send a message to the paying subscribers that you weren't well, so we were going to skip a week. But there wasn't really a way of conveying to the non-paying subscribers exactly what was going on. So I imagine, a few people who are used to getting this podcast every week and have a kind of routine based around it, like they do their dog walk or they go to the gym or they do a drive or whatever, they might have been slightly discombobulated. And maybe we should have some kind of, check on our Twitter and we'll explain what's going on. Or maybe they should just become paying subscribers and then they get the message.
Way. They'd get the round robin email. But yeah.
I felt a bit guilty about it. I felt like I was really anxious that we were sort of missing one and that people wouldn't know what was going on and that we were kind of not discharging our responsibilities. But I'm just kind of a bit odd like that. I mean,
you're a workaholic, but so am I in a different way. But I was so ill and not eating that I couldn't even think clearly. Like I wasn't eating probably for days. I went into work actually one night because they still tried to force me to work. I just had to go home, and then I just sat there not eating for days, and it was really weird. So seems to be a lot better now. So
anyway, it's good you're better.
And by the way, I
can see you've lost weight.
Thank you. I put some of it back on. You should have seen me at the peak illness. Right. By the way, one thing though, I went to this doctor who was one of these sort of can I say that? No, I won't say that. He was one of these doctors who wasn't that arsed. He was one of these doctors, on our amazing NHS. He wasn't that arsed. He prodded around a bit. But when I was there, he took my blood pressure as standard. And I looked across and noticed that was way too high.
Right.
So although I was worried about my stomach, I should be worried about my blood pressure. And one of the things that puts up my blood pressure is doing the Weekly Sceptic, working with Toby, and having people say, where's the Weekly Sceptic on Twitter? So these people just will push me into a heart attack. That's what they want. Then where's the Weekly Sceptic going to be, right? Nick can do it from the hospital. Nick, do it when you're dead. It's like, they don't think I'm a person. I'm trying to do GB News bloody constantly 3 or 4 times a week. This, my other podcast, and then, where is it? Anyway, thanks for listening. That's what I'm trying to say. And hopefully I won't have a heart attack. And that's me then recapped. But you also wanted to quickly recap the stories.
So I had prepared a number of stories for last week. So Eurovision, I wanted to do something about the Eurovision Song Contest. I in another capacity, I'm a director of something called the British Friends of Israel, and we sent out an email to our 45,000 plus email subscribers urging them to vote for Eden Galan, the Israeli contestant in the Eurovision Song Contest, whom Greta Thunberg and others were protesting about.
Is this some sort of Zionist pressure group? I don't know what I have no part of this, guys. Yeah, I'm Palestine. Toby's Israel.
This is how the vote was rigged by Zionists. And I think we may have played a small part in the fact that in the people's vote, because we sent people a link to how they could vote, and in the people's vote, Eden Galan from British viewers of Eurovision got the maximum number of points, 12 points, whereas Ollie, what was he called? Ollie, Alexander, the British contestant, got zero votes from British television viewers. I don't know if you saw and contrasted the different songs and accompanying videos, but Eden Galan's was, it was a classic power ballad. It was perfectly inoffensive. It was fine, and she's a beautiful girl. Ollie Alexander.
That's the one I saw. The
weird gay thing. He sort of the video seemed to be simulating a cottaging experience. It was literally set in what looked like a public lavatory, and he was seemingly kind of engaging in kind of simulated intercourse with strange men in this public lavatory. Didn't George Michael
do that years ago with that outside?
Did he? Maybe to make it even worse, it was a scrape of another cottaging pop video.
Don't say scrape.
But anyway, I was pleased to see that he got 0 votes. Also pleased that the ghastly Bambi Thug, the Irish contestant who described herself as non-binary and
that's the satanic Irish thing.
Yes. That satanic thing is now so tired. Why do they do it? But it was such a perfect contrast, wasn't it, between the kind of the woke liberal left. Their kind of tribune was Bambi Thug and appeared. Someone described her as looking like Cruella de Vil with horns or something. No, Veruca Salt with antlers. That's right.
Okay.
And she had these kind of spikes. So she was dressed up as the devil, and she engaged in what she called kind of primordial screaming, which is another way of saying she can't actually sing. And of course, she was lavishly praised by the Toshak, who described her as they in his praise of her. And Bambi Thug seemed like a perfect name to capture the kind of awful woke cult, which does engage in this cute authoritarianism. That was a phrase the Scottish writer Ewan Morrison came up with to describe the hate monster, a kind of cute sort of ambassador for these new authoritarian hate crime laws. Similarly, Bambi Thug, a combination of kind of a cute, fluffy, innocent Disney character and a thug, cute authoritarianism.
Nice. Yes.
But it was great to see that Israel actually, with a bit of help from Zionists manipulating the media and the vote and so forth, actually beat Ireland into 6th place. So Israel came 5th, Ireland came 6th. That was wonderful. I did sort of wonder, and I wondered if you had a theory on this, as to why so many Eurovision contestants are non-binary. I mean, there was the winner, Nemo, described him or herself as non-binary and presumably called him or herself after Nemo in the Disney cartoon because clownfish are supposedly born without a gender. So that was the reference to being non-binary. But why? What are they? It seemed like a kind of font of kind of trans propaganda.
Yeah, I've got 2 answers. Number one is that this Eurovision is a kind of political contest. As we know, all the countries rate other countries based on their relationships to them. It's a kind of putting forward the face of your country on the European stage. It's like a kind of meeting in Brussels or something with shit songs. So I would say it's because it's political. And what is a political trend amongst the woke elite? Non-binary. It's one of the trends, right? So that's one theory. Second theory, it's known, and I think Alex told me this, that our producer, that actually Britain doesn't want to win because it's too expensive. And other people have told me it's basically bankrupt Ireland winning these blooming things. So no one wants it. So they don't actually want to win. So one way to not win is have a shit song, but another way to not win might be to have a really unpopular thing like woke nonsense, like gender ideology, like, hey, I'm the non-binary satanic one. Well, we won't vote for that freak, and no one's going to get...
Right.
We're not going to have to be saddled with this bloody event.
Except it's usually kind of, men with beards who self-identify as women or non-binary Swiss creatures who win. So that, I mean...
Really?
Yeah, well, this year...
Oh, yeah,
Nemo
the bearded
won.
one that won.
And the bearded one, yeah.
So you're right. That's scuppers my theory. Yeah, I don't know. What's your theory?
Well, I think it's Eurovision has always been a kind of showcase for quote-unquote European values, by which I mean, the values of the European Union and the values the European Union wants other people to celebrate and wants European countries to represent and be ambassadors for the rest of the world, and tolerance for the LGBT community, particularly with a particular emphasis on the T, seems to be where they kind of locate the kind of acme of those values. In European countries, we are so civilized, so liberal, so inclusive. and we celebrate diversity in all its forms, that we actually love and celebrate these non-binary young people or trans young people. It's the same reason the Foreign Office, I recently discovered, has devoted £80 million to promoting gender identity ideology across the world. It's what Europe and Britain as well now, it's what they want to be known for, what they think are the best of European values. It's men wearing skirts.
So that's my first point then. It's putting forward the values of the country in a kind of quasi-political setting.
Yeah.
So that was my first point. So we agree on that. Okay, so that's why there's so many non-binaries in the Eurovision. Anything else you wanted to recap?
Well, there was
Toby?
the defection of Natalie Elphicke, which was kind of odd because she was always considered to be, on the right of the Parliamentary Conservative Party, being the MP for Dover, quite tough.
Which means she's only a socialist, not a communist.
Right, but she crossed the floor, joined the Labour Party, caused a bit of consternation in the Labour Party because she is considered to be, unacceptably far right by Labour MPs. She, when she defected, said in almost a parody now of what has become the defection speech, that when she joined the party, she thought the Conservative Party occupied the centre ground, but far right Rishi Sunak, I mean, she didn't actually describe him as far right, but that was the implication, has vacated the centre ground and drifted too far to the right, presumably a reference to the Rwanda policy, which up until 5 minutes ago she's been a vociferous supporter of. And it just seemed, like a kind of parody almost of a kind of defection of a Tory MP to Labour. Why did Keir Starmer welcome her to his party? I mean, presumably to discomfort the Tories, but some MPs asked, would he welcome Nigel Farage if Nigel Farage wanted to defect from Reform to Labour because it might discombobulate Richard Tice? I mean, is he completely unprincipled? Does he stand for nothing?
Didn't someone in Labour suggest that he would welcome Farage?
I think they did. I think that was what's next.
Yeah.
Nigel Farage.
And Farage wanted a trade job with Starmer in the US, so it could easily happen. I mean, he's going to have a lot of problems with the left of his party, isn't he? It's going to be fascinating. But Elphicke, isn't she standing down anyway? And so it doesn't really matter. It's all sort of pointless.
Well, I think she is standing down, but perhaps she's been promised a peerage.
Right.
Someone said it was because, and let's say this is pure speculation, because we don't want to be sued for libel, but she had applied for planning permission from the local Labour council to convert a garden shed or a garage into a residence, and it had been denied, and perhaps she's hoping that if she defects to Labour, the Labour-controlled local council might be more sympathetic to her planning application.
And those are not the views of the Weekly Sceptic or Nick Dixon. They are the views of Toby Young. And by the way, I don't think it works. You're the expert on law, not me, but I don't think it works that you just go, we don't want to be sued by libel, and then just say something libelous. I don't want to be, guys. So let's bear that in mind.
This is a theory someone's run up the flagpole. There's no evidence that it's actually
Many people
true.
are saying it may appear to some people satirically. I've covered it with all that. I've heard Portillo once saying it may appear, that's one way you can get out of it. It may appear to some, and then satirical content gives you more leeway, I've heard.
Right, yeah.
So I just say it may appear to some satirically that she wants a shed to be converted. but I don't believe that for 1 second. I think Natalie Elphicke is a beacon of integrity, and I had totally heard of her before this story. To make that absolutely clear. So
you may have heard of her because when her husband was done in some scandal, she then replaced him as the MP for Dover. He was her predecessor, and I think they've now. I'm not sure if they've separated or not, but in any event, I think he's actually. Because she was then accused after she defected by a former justice minister of having inappropriately lobbied him to try and secure a kind of clemency for her husband who was being prosecuted for something. Anyway,
okay.
So,
well, I don't know Natalie. That's her name, isn't it?
Yeah.
But she probably won't listen to this, especially if she's defecting to Labour. She'll have to defect away from the Weekly Sceptic. But every other politician listens to it. I met Suella briefly at GB. I just said hi. She said hi. She seemed nice. Met Priti Patel there. They all listen. I'm guessing. I mean, I don't know if they do, but some of the politicians do. And I'm trying to get Suella on my other podcast. I say trying. I haven't asked at all. I've just had a thought about it. Right. That's what counts.
Was she in GB News following her attempt to interview some of the pro-Palestinian protesters, and which
yes.
she gave her the silent treatment?
That was weird.
It was weird, and she did that kind of subsequent kind of head-to-head with the attractive young Revolutionary Communist Party member, and the Revolutionary Communist Party member just basically kind of insulted her in a kind of, I thought, cheap but not very imaginative, entirely predictable way. And afterwards on Twitter, she was universally acclaimed for having kind of owned Suella in the interview. I didn't think she owned her at all. She just refused to actually engage in debate in a grown-up way.
Yeah, I watched it on mute, because you're waiting to go on and it's on the screens, which turned out to be the best way to watch it. But I feel bad for Suella. I feel like she sort of walked into something then. We shouldn't maybe do that because maybe she won't come back on the channel. So I didn't watch it. But why would you want to be accosted by some far left nutter? I suppose that's
like the new Ash Sarkar.
Oh yeah, that's what we really need, a new Ash Sarkar. But you know what? I suppose the whole point is balance, Toby. And unless you've got any more recaps, that would perfectly bring us to our first story.
Let's go for the first story.
All right, because it's all about having Ofcom balance. That's probably why you have to have Suella Braverman against some random nutter. I mean, it's not exactly the same, the former Home Secretary versus some far left nutter we found, but you have to have balance. It's obsession with balance. So what's happened is Ofcom have attacked GB News once again, and the story here at GB itself is GB News hits back at terrifying Ofcom ruling on People's Forum. We will never stop fighting to be the voice of the people. So they condemned this show with Rishi Sunak, where he was doing this People's Forum. He stood up there, took questions in his little shirt, and it didn't go very well for him. If you recall the show, he was absolutely savage, including by an unfortunate man who had suffered vaccine injuries and was basically like, what are you going to do for us? And Rishi was like, look, it's terrible and blah, blah. And like, he just got hammered. The whole thing just got savage. Didn't come across well at all. No. Struggled against the actual people.
It was hardly a party political broadcast for the Conservative Party. Which is how it was more or less kind of depicted in the Ofcom ruling. No,
in fact, politicians across the land would have been watching it thinking, let's never speak directly to the public again, because it was so, such a grilling. And yet this wasn't impartial enough for Ofcom. They said it was a lack of impartiality. An appropriately wide range of significant viewpoints was not presented. And they also said, we found that an appropriately, that's the same point again, and given due weight in this case, I pasted the same thing in twice there, guys. Sorry. And as a result, Sunak had a mostly uncontested platform to promote the policies and performance of his government in a period preceding a UK general election. And they say, our decision is that this breach was serious and repeated. We will therefore consider this breach for the imposition of a statutory sanction. I can totally read. So that's incredible, because they're saying the presenter didn't push back enough, it wasn't serious enough, and there was no other politicians on there. But, I mean, the people pushed back on him. And you just have to compare shows in the past with Tony Blair on these one-off special question times. Tom Harwood shared one from 2005. Then there was another one that was even more apt. Just Blair on his own saying, I'm Blair, aren't I awesome? And everyone going, woo. And it's like, where are the other people there? You don't always have to have... I remember Thatcher being interviewed on her own and doing little speeches.
Well, there's Call Keir on LBC, in which Keir Starmer is interviewed by himself.
That's what it's called.
Call Keir. And he's better call Keir. And he's grilled by listeners who call in. That hasn't received any Ofcom complaints, and they certainly haven't been upheld as far as I know.
Right. Lammy's been in a little bit of trouble for announcing a news story, but that's about it. Yeah, it's absurd. It's an obvious attack. GB are hitting back. I'll say one little wrinkle of this that annoys me, and I went back and forth with some people on X and /Twitter, and it was one of these classic things where a woman who I'm sure is very nice was saying to me, you're naive, you're being naive and engaging in wishful thinking. Then I say, well, you don't know anything about this topic. Then she goes, oh, I thought you were decent. We don't have to speak down to me. I'm like, you just called me naive. Like that is actually, traditionally, that's not a great thing to be called to your face. But the point was, I'm putting the cart before the horse, because the point was that the argument I've seen from her and many other online types is that GB capitulated by getting rid of their most base presenters. And I like all these presenters. I like Dan. Hopefully I'm friendly with Dan and Loza and all these people. And Stein was very good. Don't know him personally, but he was very good. I have no beef with any of these presenters. But the idea that they were trying to feed the crocodile, as one person put it, and appease Ofcom, I've never believed that. It doesn't really make any sense. I mean, I think there might be something in the idea that your investors are concerned about the tone of certain presenters. And I'm not saying I have inside knowledge, but I can imagine that being true. But the idea that, we feed them some presenters because Ofcom will leave us alone, I just don't believe that's ever been in GB's thinking. And it doesn't make, it's just it's a convenient Twitter narrative that to me doesn't stack up.
Yeah. Is it the Churchill quote about appeasement, in which you feed the crocodile in the hope that he'll eat you last?
There's that. Well, he also had the tiger in your mouth. There's the one from Darkest Hour. You cannot reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth. Yeah. But maybe he's done both of those.
Both of
Churchill said most things.
Yeah. I mean, that criticism, I think, is doesn't really land because GB News has no choice about whether to comply with the broadcasting code if it wants to retain its broadcast license. So I mean, I like you, I like Mark Stein, Lawrence Fox, Dan Wootton, but I think in the case of, I've written about it before in The Spectator. I'm not sure they had much choice about how they responded to those Ofcom rulings. This seems to be an escalation in Ofcom's kind of ongoing scrutiny and hostility towards GB News, because this is the first time Ofcom is considering a statutory sanction. So it hasn't imposed a statutory sanction before. In every previous case, it's just been a wrist slap, no fine, nothing. This time, if they decide, there's a kind of like a 2-month process in which they decide whether a statutory sanction is appropriate, and they say it could be. In this case, they haven't decided yet, but it could be because, first of all, breaking this due impartiality rule, number 5 in the broadcasting code, is more serious than breaking some other rules, and it's the third time they've committed this offence according to Ofcom. So the first time was, Esther and Phil interviewing Jeremy Hunt, 2 Conservative politicians interviewing a Conservative Chancellor. And the other time was Martin Daubney standing in for Lawrence Fox when Lawrence still had a show, and interviewing Richard Tice about, I think, about Rwanda or something. So they say it's a third offence. And a statutory sanction can range from a fine to suspension of GB News's broadcast licence. It probably won't be that. It'll probably be a fine, if that. I spoke to Ofcom about it yesterday because I've written about it in the Spectator this week. To deal with the point you referred to, which is that GB News should have been particularly fastidious about observing this particular part of the broadcasting code because we're in a pre-election period. That's just nonsense. I was on Jacob Rees-Mogg's show on Monday to talk about this. The person putting the case for the Ofcom was Michael Crick, and we joked beforehand that if we both approved Ofcom's decision, Ofcom might then sanction Jacob for not having a balanced discussion about Ofcom's decision. But anyway, we didn't. He was opposed to it, and I was. He was in favour of it. I was opposed. But one point Jacob made was that since the repeal of the Fixed Term Parliament Act, given that it's now back in the gift of the PM to call an election whenever he wants, you could describe any period in British politics as a pre-election period. Who knows when the election's going to be? It's one thing to say that you have to be particularly observant of this particular rule during a general election campaign. Fair enough. But to say, well, we're not in a general election campaign, but this is a particularly febrile pre-election period in which the election is going to be within the next 12 months. It was that they were inventing this kind of concept in order to kind of rationalise being more heavy-handed, taking the gloves off this time. The stuff about kind of, a broad range of views being given due weight and so forth. Well, if you watch the programme, there were a broad range of, anti-conservative views expressed. Rishi was criticised for the Rwanda policy, probably not going to work. A trans person got up and said, why should members of the LGBT community vote Conservative? What have you done for us? There was a criticism for not building more houses. And when I put this back to Ofcom, they said, yes, but the questioners weren't given an opportunity to follow up and criticise Rishi's answers. And the presenter didn't do enough of that himself. But, GB News wanted to prioritise giving as many members of the studio audience an opportunity to ask a question as possible, over and above giving, a handful an opportunity to cross-examine Rishi Sunak. Why is that a breach of impartiality? It wasn't as if, he got off lightly. As you say, if you watch the programme, it looked like he was torn a new one. And as for the presenter not kind of asking follow-up questions or, subjecting his answers to more scrutiny, well, in fact, he did. On Jacob's show on Monday, they showed the presenter doing that at least 3 times. But in addition, it seemed to be a complaint that Rishi wasn't interrupted enough. the audience and the presenter didn't give an opportunity to interrupt him often enough. But actually, the constant interruption of senior politicians when they're on the television or the radio is actually something, I mean, most people really intensely dislike. They want politicians to be given a chance to set out their stall so they can make, informed decisions. So that seemed to me to be ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, it does feel like, Ofcom pretend that it's a purely kind of quasi-judicial decision in which they're just adjudicating, they're just examining whether GB News broke these rules, and then there's no political bias at all. But actually, they have so much discretion, so much latitude in deciding why should breadth not be okay, but depth be okay when deciding whether whether people are given a chance to express kind of a broad range of views and so forth.
Yeah,
I mean, it feels a bit arbitrary, and so what's the explanation? It must be because Ofcom knows which way the wind is blowing, and it's we're going to have a Labour government soon. Let's do something that's going to please our new political masters.
Okay, well, you've spoken for so long there that we're in danger of breaching impartiality. So let me just come back, because that's what they're complaining about. Ofcom themselves on their X said, our investigation took into account the audience's questions to the Prime Minister. While some provided criticism, audience members were not able to challenge the PM's responses, as you say, and the presenter did not do this to a meaningful extent. Then they said, here are our findings, right? And they had this sort of pedantic list. And it ends up just looking to me like people who don't have to make TV programs, just with a list of annoying complaints, like anyone could have about our podcast or anything. Like, here's where it could have been better. It's like, what are these? Like producers' notes, like like producers ruining a movie or script or something. It's like, try and make something. I know it's also politically biased, and that's the main point. That yes, they can just attack GB News, and they like doing that, and there's a lot of popularity when they do that. A lot of people trying to get them to do it, activists. But there's just this other funny element. There's just like, actually, this is just. That the show you want would be impossible. It's kind of like the Oscars. No, 35% have got to be from a BAME lesbian, but it's like that's not how art's made. And similarly, that's not how TV's made. You put the Prime Minister there, you get an audience. We don't have the biggest budget. We're GB News, we're a new channel. We've got very limited resources. We put out a show and we do our best. And what actually this is a bit like, could have been better here, guys. It's like, well, F off, it's live TV. It's not that easy. Like, a lot of it is just like, we did our best to make a TV show.
I know, a lot of, as you're right, a lot of their criticisms feel like kind of criticisms a TV critic might make rather than, an impartial regulator. I mean, one of the criticisms was, there were a broad enough range of views wasn't expressed. So, I think maybe they have a point in that many of the criticisms seem to be the sorts of criticisms that people to the right of the Parliamentary Conservative Party and Rishi Sunak's government would make, rather than, people who are planning to support Labour would make. But one of the reasons for that is they didn't vet the questions beforehand. They didn't know what questions were going to be asked. That was an editorial decision. They wanted there to be that element of spontaneity. No one knew what was coming, not least Rishi Sunak. But the presenter didn't know either. And that gave it, I think, a kind of spontaneity and a kind of danger that programmes in which the questions have been vetted beforehand and there's going to be a broad range of questions which Ofcom's going to be happy with are less exciting, less interesting to watch. So that did feel like a kind of an editorial criticism rather than a regulatory point.
Yes, and I mean, the audience asked what they were going to ask, and I thought it was a key point there. Someone else said this to me on X, that there were criticisms from the right, and that's what really makes Ofcom uncomfortable. They don't want to hear that the public's actually far to the right of Rishi Sunak. They want to hear, and there was the LGBT person, but they want to hear loads of that. Why aren't you obsessed with climate change? And why is the ECHR amazing? And just stuff like that. They don't want to hear we hate immigration and and by the way, I was vaccine injured. That's the last thing they want to hear. So that's what it really was. I think
Ofcom's criticisms of GB News and the kind of ongoing criticism of GB News, which is that it's a font of right-wing propaganda, which of course is nonsense. It's politically closer to the Telegraph than it is to Fox News. It's slightly right of centre, perhaps.
It's far left.
From your point of view,
we proved two things.
Well, I was going to make that point.
The Starmer thing.
So it was like people claiming that the Sun is an instrument of kind of Tory propaganda and was turned into one by Rupert Murdoch, who wanted the Tory government to do him favours and so forth. And then the discovery that actually a majority of Sun readers actually vote Labour. Ditto with GB News, I think you were just going to say. I mean, there was that recent poll last month which found that more GB News viewers were planning to vote Labour than Conservative or Reform.
Yes.
And I think where Ofcom is going wrong, and where the critics of GB News are going wrong, is in assuming that the audience are just these kind of credulous kind of receptacles who will just do whatever these propagandists on their kind of favourite TV station are telling them to do, which is nonsense. You know, people have agency. People don't do what they're told to do. All this kind of propaganda, if it is propaganda, kind of washes over their heads, and you know, it takes its part, and all kinds of other chorus of kind of influences and voices. The idea that they can be easily manipulated by these kind of evil far right kind of political masterminds is just for the birds.
That's such a blob midwit take. But the other thing is, according to Tom Harwood, GB tried to get Starmer first. They wanted Starmer just to be mouthing off on his own in a shirt.
Yeah.
So it would have been the same. Yeah. And I'm sure, you know, maybe Starmer deliberately didn't do it to get them in trouble for DHS.
Yeah. Ofcom said to me when I spoke to them yesterday that had GB News said at the end of the programme, and coming up, we're going to have a People's Forum with Keir Starmer. Tune in this time next week. Then they wouldn't be considering a statutory sanction. They probably wouldn't even found that there'd been a breach of the broadcasting code. But because they weren't able to say that, then it was more incumbent upon them to observe these other ways of being duly impartial.
It's not our fault that Starmer won't do it. It says here, GB News did not and was not able to include a reference in the programme to an agreed future programme in which an appropriately wide range of significant views on the major matter, weird writing, would be presented and given due weight. I don't know. So, yeah, we didn't get Starmer. It's not really our fault. Like, try and book Starmer. I mean, it's not that easy. He does it sometimes. I mean, he has done it. I saw him with Choppers the other day. It looked like he was interviewing Choppers, which was weird. He wasn't, just the way it was framed. But it's like Andrew Doyle all the time. Oh, you didn't get any women to talk about this. Like, it's not that easy to book women on a show. You know, we do our best. He's put together a show. People are they're sitting at home going, oh, it's not perfect. It's like quite hard to make live TV on a budget. Anyway, the other thing, just briefly, yes, GB News is a left-wing channel not because they want to be, but because the Overton window is so far left, you couldn't even have an actual right-wing channel. No one would be ready for what that actually would mean. So that's always been my theory. The Overton window is so far left that Ofcom means the centre is actually quite far left. Therefore, GB News is by default left-wing. And now I've also got my Starmer thing to prove my point. So it's a left-wing channel, if anything. Why do they keep booking Michael Crick, by the way? Because he actively says it shouldn't exist and often uses his airtime on GB to say it shouldn't exist. That is taking impartiality too far in my book. We don't have someone on the Weekly Sceptic who constantly says it should be shut down. Oh, thanks for that. Yeah, fuck off. You know, it's ridiculous. He's like, well, this just challenge doesn't even exist. It was like, well, you shouldn't be on it, that's for sure. One last thing then. I'm a Celeb bosses have warned watchdogs will come down on them like a ton of bricks if they continue to sign up politicians for the show. So this is just a sort of second point on Ofcom. Someone here from Ofcom says, if broadcasters want to take the risk of having a high-profile politician who's not standing for a seat hosting a programme, they're going to have to work bloody hard to make sure that those programmes are duly impartial. We will come down on them like a ton of bricks if they aren't. I mean, imagine like Farage there eating whatever they're eating, cockroaches and stuff. I've not really watched it. And he's having to constantly be counted. Well, he was counted, wasn't he, by that annoying French bloke? But you have to have a Labour politician there eating some other bug, constantly saying, oh, no, immigration's good. I mean, it's awful. What an awful show that will be. And it's one other point I wanted to make, but it's gone out of my head. Anyway, got anything on that?
I mean, one phenomenon that we've seen in kind of the intersection between politics and entertainment in the past sort of 10 years or so is this, it's becoming an increasingly kind of grey area in which politicians are kind of becoming entertainers, whether by entering the jungle or hosting programs on GB News. And that, you know, it's almost as though Ofcom has finally now woken up to this. Far too late, the horse was bolted. And saying, oh, well, we can't have this. It's like, well, we've had it for the past 10, 15 years. You know, why are you only objecting now? And why are you, in particular, singling out GB News for this sin?
Yeah. And the only other thing I wanted to say was just reiterating your point that they use the phrase, a period preceding a UK general election. Well, we're always in a period either just before or just after an election. As you say, we're not in an election run-up. It's not even by-elections. It hasn't called a general election. So, of course, it's before a general election. But that refers to everything. It's before
they've literally
the apocalypse as
invented this kind of political concept out of thin air,
and
claimed that there's somehow in I don't know the 6 months prior to when an election can be called, broadcasters have to be particularly careful to observe due impartiality. It's like, who heard that before?
And we don't even know if Rishi's going to be the leader. You know what I mean? He could be there and he's not even the leader. So I don't know. That's all nonsense. Nonsense from Ofcom, but it does make you worry, how long can GB last and all that. I mean, hope it lasts. Let's see. Obviously, I hope it lasts, but I've got a massive interest in it lasting. But let's do, should we move on? You ready to move on?
Yeah, well, just one final point on that, what you just said.
34 minutes.
Do you think that actually the owners of GB News, who are losing money hand over fist and presumably don't want to kind of continue to lose money, are probably secretly hoping that GB News will suspend its broadcast license and they can become kind of martyrs to free speech, claim that Ofcom needs to be scrapped, etc., but not actually lose any more money?
I never thought of that, but who knows? I wouldn't want to speak ill of people who pay my wages, but who knows? I sometimes think it's quite good to get fired if you're going to go. It's best not to your show just to be discontinued for sort of admin reasons. It's better to get fired in a place, go on my Substack, go on my give, send, go.
From the point of view of the investors in GB News, winding it up because it loses so much money would be far more humiliating than having their broadcast license suspended by Ofcom.
Yes. I've thought about saying something outrageous and being like, guys, look, I was too outrageous for GB. Give me some money. You know what I mean? Because it's better than if we go because Headliners gets discontinued. So anyway, far too much information there. Probably in trouble for all of that.
We should do a special episode in which we kind of imagine what it would be like if the Weekly Sceptic was regulated by Ofcom. We invite Michael Crick on and he can be incredibly rude to us.
That's a good concept, actually. Ofcom regulated Weekly Sceptic would be awful, but be interesting. Okay, let's move on then and do Iran. Let's not spend too much time because we've gone quite long on that. But it's quite a short story anyway, which is, of course, that the Iranian president has been killed in a helicopter crash. And I suppose it's not the kind of thing we always cover because it's not really, it kind of is culture war in a way, but we should cover it. This is this Raisi, that's how I heard it pronounced. Sorry if that's wrong. And he was killed in this helicopter crash, and lots of people speculating, was it genuine? Did Israel do it? Did they make the weather happen? Did they put the mountain there? Was it the Iranian regime that did it? I mean, Khomeini has just sort of carried on and said, we're carrying on, we're going to replace him, nothing to see here. And there were some slightly cringe memes of the hair of all the women taking down the helicopter. It was the girl bosses that did it. And there was the also quite cringe thing of the BBC, classic BBC. Let me just find it. They said President Ebrahim Raisi's mixed legacy in Iran. And this was quite a funny phrase, mixed legacy. And there was a community note saying, Raisi's nickname was the Butcher of Tehran as a result of his mass murder and brutal torture of political dissidents. So they've gone a bit austere religious scholar there. They've gone a bit come on, BBC.
Yeah. Not only was he, I think when he was in his 20s, and he was the Deputy Prosecutor General, he was on a 4-man death commission in Tehran that retried prisoners who already had been tried and sent to jail for political crimes, and then ordered the extrajudicial execution of thousands of them, and is thought to be, one of this body of people responsible for between 3,000 and 30,000 executions, extrajudicial killings, and of course he clamped down on women who weren't complying with the Islamic dress code as president, and something like 20,000 women in Iran have been arrested, and something like 500 killed, including the poor woman who died in jail. The Butcher of Tehran, and yet that didn't stop the deputy British ambassador to the UN from standing when the UN observed a minute's silence for the Butcher of Tehran earlier this week.
Killed 30,000 people, was it? But he liked
between 3 and 30,000.
Okay. But liked classical music, so it was a mixed legacy. I don't know what the mixed part was. I've just made that one up. Yeah. Nice to animals, so it's mixed.
Yeah.
Probably not that nice to animals, I'm guessing.
We published a piece in, maybe too soon for this, you told me, we published a piece in the Daily Sceptic by one of our regulars called Paul Sutton, speculating that the reason the helicopter crashed is because actually the Raisi and his foreign minister, who was also killed, they were big Arsenal fans because, of course, Arsenal is the great rival to Tottenham, which is the Jewish club. So They naturally wanted Arsenal to win the league, and they also hate Man City because Man City is owned by
so they're not all bad
Emiratis.
Am I right,
so
guys?
the reason the helicopter crashed, they were watching the Sky main event in the helicopter, the Man City West Ham game, and when Man City pulled a goal back when they were 2-0 down, they all leapt to their feet, spilt their beer, and started celebrating, and the chopper went down.
I'd say that's likely. I mean, normally that would be too soon, but because this guy's not the most liked, you're going to probably get away with it.
Okay.
But I mean, we all want City to lose with their financial dodginess, and they're a plastic team. We all know this. Man United's a real team. We don't need to go into
the other
this.
way around.
Man United's an ancient team which have been winning since the dawn of time.
But I thought
with
Man
the
City was like
Busby
the working
Babes.
class team.
No, they're
Mancunians
plastic
actually
bought
support,
by
whereas
rich.
Man United are all out of town.
Busby Babes, the Ferguson era, the young team Ferguson brought up. You're talking about, it's nonsense. We built our money, then City are just a bought team bought by foreign plastic owners.
I've clearly been listening to
and
the Gallagher
financial fair play dodginess, dodgy. What is it? 100 and something charges, 200. Anyway, sorry to Man City fans listening. For Ofcom balance,
I just wanted to briefly contrast the UN honouring the butcher of Tehran with a minute's silence with this UN...
You don't want to do a minute's silence now, you mean? No, you're contrasting it.
Contrasting it with this UN human rights body in which Amal Clooney is a member, asking the International Criminal Court to issue an arrest warrant for not just Netanyahu, but also the leader of Hamas, implying that there is a moral equivalence between Israel and Hamas, which is obviously deeply offensive. And David Lammy, Labour's shadow foreign secretary, said, yes, I think this is, if the head of the ICC has asked for an arrest warrant to be issued for Netanyahu, then I don't have a problem with that. We have to let justice take its course. I think that was a terrible mistake. I mean, Israel is essentially siding with this kind of progressive, radical chief prosecutor who wants to arrest a head of state because he thinks he's the moral equivalent of the head of Hamas. Pretty shocking, and a big departure from the Labour Party actually taking the same line as the Conservatives when it comes to Israel and Hamas, obviously pandering to their lost Muslim voters that Lammy's hoping to win back. But I wonder if he ran that by Starmer before taking that position. It felt like he didn't, and now they're trying to make the best of it. But I think Lammy's a bit of a liability.
Well, he does spend a lot of time opening health centres in Tottenham. I was in one the other night, so his eyes off the ball. Sorry, I'm my eyes off the ball a bit because I'm flagging because I'm so hungry because I'm still not eating properly. I've just eaten this single plain cheese sandwich. So I'm proposing, for that reason, moving on to our next story. What do you think, Toby?
Yep, let's do that.
Okay, which is this one about Holland. So here, the Times here has Dutch populist government to abolish asylum permits. And that's the headline, but the really big story is just that they've managed to get this coalition government going. Geert Wilders, of course, I don't know if you followed it, wasn't allowed to become the leader because they didn't really like him, but he won the election. But they said, no, we'll do this coalition, but you can't be leader. And it's between the VVD and the NSC and the BBB, or I think BBB as they're called weirdly in Holland, but that's the farmer party. And so they managed to form this government, and it's quite interesting because it's going to be the most strict immigration policy. They're saying we want to stem the excessive influx of asylum seekers and immigrants. We want farmers, gardeners, and fishermen to have a future again. And of course, they're describing Wilders as the Dutch Trump. And this proposed policy would abolish asylum permits. Migrants given refugee status will no longer be given priority when allocating social housing. Asylum seekers who have been rejected or do not have papers will be deported as soon as possible. And then there's the stuff for farmers, like EU environmental targets to cut nitrogen emissions will be diluted with no forced reduction in the livestock population, etc., etc. And interestingly, because he's also big on anti-Semitism, as in he's against it, they'll also make school lessons on the Holocaust mandatory, which is interesting though. And the speed limit of 80 miles an hour will be reintroduced from the current 62 miles per hour. So it's this kind of it's this kind of neo-lib authoritarianism, kind of soft neo-lib authoritarianism of Holland, the kind of lame liberal safety rubbish that they're kind of against as well. And they'll try and build houses, as they always say, and etc. But the EU are worried, which is always a good sign. So the EU were very worried about this. I mean, Franz Timmermans said Wilders will be in the centre of power. I find that very worrying. It's like, maybe you should listen to the people then when they kept talking about immigration and farming and net zero being bollocks. But it's the same problems any country is facing, same concerns our people have in Britain, or many do. But is it actually a meaningful change? Is it finally people getting the policies they want? I asked Pete North about this the other day, and he's talked about it on X, and he was saying, "Well, I'll believe it when I see it, because will anything actually happen? That's the key." So is this a sort of move towards populism in Europe, or just will it be stifled?
Well, it's a definite improvement on what we thought the outcome of the Dutch general election was, which was just stalemate, with another election being inevitable because Geert Wilders and the other political party leaders couldn't possibly agree on any kind of programme. Well, they have agreed on a programme. It's a pretty good programme. I mean, I'd be very happy if a British Conservative government embraced this programme. I mean, a reduction in immigration, which they seem very serious about, and Geert Wilders, even though he won't be the PM, will have to deliver on that. They're not abandoning the emissions targets in the kind of Paris Agreement, but they are scrapping a new carbon tax. They're scrapping the requirement that homeowners have to replace gas boilers with heat pumps. They're doing a lot of really sensible things on that front. They really seem to be properly resiling on the kind of net zero agenda. And he's all in favour of fiscal tightening too. So we're going to see a reduction in public expenditure. He's pro-agriculture. So it feels like, a proper programme, a robustly right-wing programme, which is obviously quite popular, and not just popular in Holland, but popular in other parts of Europe too. Dan Hannan made this interesting point in a piece in the Telegraph on Sunday, in which he said that the Remainers always think of the European Union as a kind of repository of the liberal values they worry that Britain has departed from in deciding to leave the EU. And the kind of caricature was that we've cut ourselves adrift. We're going to drift off into the North Sea and become these kind of xenophobic little England right-wingers, whereas Europe is going to continue to thrive as this cosmopolitan, liberal, diverse kind of nirvana. Actually, if you look what's happening in Europe, in continental Europe, the right, the populist right, is on the rise, whereas only in Britain is a progressive leader likely to win the next election. Yeah. It's actually, I wonder if they're now reconsidering whether they think we should actually rejoin.
I think we've talked about this. We should be rejoining to get the benefits of populism in Europe.
Yes.
It could easily go like that. Yeah, well, and Wilders says the sun will shine again in the Netherlands. There you go. We'll go from being the largest opposition party to the largest government party. He says we're making history today. These are all normal politician things to say. But if you read the names quickly, it's the PVV, VVD, NSC, BBB. It sounds like a Billy Joel song if you read them quick enough. But it's complicated Dutch politics. But all right, so you think some hope there. I don't want to do too much on it because those are pretty much our three stories. Anything else to add before we go to our ad and then Pete? Well,
let's do our ad.
Okay, let's do the ad is it from Thor again this week?
It is from Thor.
Our loyal Thor. I'll let you take it away on that.
Are you getting tired of constant conflict? Whether negotiating career and business battlegrounds, worrying about World War III and the culture wars, or negotiating the passive-aggressive stalemate of a strained marriage, there is hope. As the Serenity Prayer reminds us, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Unfortunately, ending global wars may be something you can't do, but we can end conflict closer to home, because in the end, communication is always the key to peace. Is it not? Introducing growthpresenter.com. That's growthpresenter.com. The founder of growthpresenter.com, Thor Holt, has a proven track record of guiding clients through conflict-ridden business and personal situations, leading to successful outcomes. With a focus on effective dialogue and emphatic yet commercially sound win-win presentations, Thor helps you navigate professional and personal conflict zones, transforming these stressful situations into unconventional opportunities for growth and success. From winning new career roles to sealing business deals to revitalizing cold marriages, Thor's approach yields tangible results. If you're ready to end conflict and win, Visit growthpresenter.com or connect with Thor on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Thorholt. That's growthpresenter.com or linkedin.com/in/Thorholt.
All right, well, thanks to Thor. Now let's do everyone's favourite section. It's Peak Woke. So, Toby, you've just got so many Peak Wokes this week. I'm not even really bothering, but you want to give us some of yours?
Yeah, well, I thought a good one to start with was the Reverend Dr. Michael Banner, the Dean of Trinity College, Cambridge, has written a book in which he says that Britain should pay £205 billion in reparations for slavery, paid to Caribbean nations. It's an extraordinary piece of kind of woke grandstanding. There was a really good piece by another Cambridge professor called Lawrence Goldman in the Telegraph rebutting this. He pointed out that to calculate this, Banner has taken, the slavers, when the slave trade was abolished, were compensated. They were paid a certain amount per slave. Right. And they initially asked for a total from the British government of 40 million. So he's worked out what each slave was worth from that initial claim and then calculated what we owe in reparations. But actually, the British government only paid in compensation to slave owners 20 million. So why he's taken the higher figure rather than the actual figure they got is, who knows. But also just the idea of holding the entire British people in the present day responsible for the actions of at most 45,000 Britons, 200 years ago, is completely ridiculous. I mean, that's sort of collective guilt. And some of the current British residents who'd be paying this in tax, presumably, are themselves descendants of slaves. Certainly their ancestors weren't living here when we supposedly benefited from slavery. And actually, this chap, Lawrence Goldman, points out that whilst it may be true that 45,000 Britons were involved in some way in the slave trade, at least 10 times as many 200 years ago signed dozens of anti-slavery petitions. And he also points out that Britain led the way in abolishing slavery. It was, Britain's distinction is not that it was one of the worst offenders when it came to the international slave trade. Britain's distinction is it voluntarily ended its involvement in the slave trade and led the way for the rest of the world. And he points out that, well, what about West African, compensation for their involvement in the involvement of West African nations in the slave trade? It's ridiculous to kind of put it all on Britain in the way this chap has.
Yeah, and as Christian Niemitz pointed out in his recent sort of pamphlet book thing, that Imperial Measurement, we didn't even get rich off slavery, and that's why I gave him the Based Award last time we did it, because it's all overblown anyway.
Yep.
Well, that's Banner for you. Whenever I hear Dr. Banner, I just think of the Incredible Hulk, but he should focus on not becoming a radioactive, angry mutant more. I'll throw in one, unless your one's related. Oh, do you want to do a related one, or is that the same one?
No, that was the same one.
Okay. I'll throw in one then, which is just this thing. I don't know if it's topical enough. Maybe this was too long ago, but it's the Scottish Greens expelling 13 members for declaring that sex is a biological reality, which I thought was about as peak woke as it gets. And now, in a sort of contrast to peak woke, Robin Harper, the party's first parliamentarian, has called the decision utterly laughable. I mean, how insane are the Greens now, and how is this related to carbon? To do straight people emit more carbon? I mean, and who are they trying to appeal to with this? It's just weird. The Green Party has become this kind of zombie kind of skin suit just for any radical mental idea. It's like Allahu Akbar, and we're non-binary, and we're all Greens, and here's Greta Thunberg, and what do you mean? Okay, at least she started on. She's opposite. She started on climate. Now she's like Palestine, and it all merges together. Graham Linehan, I was speaking to him the other day, called it the Omni cause. It's just this one. Weird radical left cause. Yeah,
I think Lana Shriver, when she wrote about it, it was as though she said they're choosing from the prix fixe menu. It's like they have to get everything on that side of the menu. They can't pick and choose. There's no a la carte here. They just embrace the whole package, however dotty and however inconsistent these things are. I mean, how is the Greens kind of championing of kind of non-binary people and the trans community going to sit with their newly signed up Islamic fundamentalists? I mean, you would have thought that's storing up trouble for themselves. I can't see how those two factions are going to get along very well.
Yeah, so speaking of that, this isn't really a peak woke, but just while you mentioned that, there was a kind of grimly amusing story I mean, I find it amusing, maybe there's something wrong with me, that dozens of Muslim teenagers have been sent to prevent because they're being radicalized by propaganda about Hitler. The amusing part just comes from the kind of freaking out about this amongst people, that they don't understand the link. A Home Office source said, these Islamists hate Jews and gays, and so do the far right, so that makes them think Hitler was right in some respects. It's like, but this is not new stuff. And to be fair to Josh, how he pointed this out on headlines, this is not new. And I also pointed out that the term Islamofascism was doing the rounds in the heyday of the New Atheists. They were trying to get that popularized, because it was quite well known that Wahhabi Islam is not necessarily a liberal lefty cause. Yeah. So people are trying to make this link. But now people are shocked. Oh, they seem to identify with Hitler in some way. It's like, yeah, duh.
Yeah. They thought that because some of them are joining the Green Party, they must be, woolly hat wearing knitters, yeah, bizarre. But that brings me to, actually, no, we'll do that one later. Another peak woke guy. Did you see this Eddie Izzard interview in The Telegraph? The Telegraph referred to Eddie Izzard throughout as she, her, which was disappointing, but not surprising. But the headline on this interview was Eddie Izzard saying, "I won't play a straight female role. It would be taking from others." And it's like, what, did he think he was going to be cast in the next Netflix rom-com in preference to, some beautiful American actress? I mean,
it's like, I totally could, and I would just nail it, but I wouldn't want to take away from others. I'd obviously, if I went for the role, I'd get it. I mean, amongst millions, ahead of hundreds of people, I'd get the job, but I will not take. It's quite noble, really. He won't take.
The idea that
he won't take from other women.
She was being noble by saying she's not going to take on these straight female roles. I mean, it's just, no one in their right mind would cast Eddie Izzard in a straight female role. I mean, it's never going to happen.
And on this point, Good Morning Britain did a very similar thing to the Telegraph. I'm just trying to find my little tweet about it. Although all I did was it was pretty basic. My tweet, I just said, GMB didn't get the memo that this shit is over. Enjoy your ratio. They got ratioed into oblivion because they had Eddie Izzard on. Following her critically acclaimed New York run, Eddie Izzard is back to bring her solo performance of Shakespeare's Hamlet to London. Eddie Izzard explains how she plays so many different characters. I mean, they've done 3 in there. They're almost taking the piss. I mean, why are you still doing this? No one believes Eddie Izzard is a woman. No one believes. I don't think Eddie Izzard even really thinks. Even he says, I'm sort of this.
Well, interestingly, in the Telegraph article, he says he doesn't really care whether you address him as him, her, they, and yet the author doggedly continues to refer to him as she, her.
They need to get with the program, the cast review. You've lost. Get over it. Stop doing it. It's the gutlessness of media to not do it. The Telegraph normally just goes out of their way to not have to do it. They just end up saying the well-known comedian, the actor, they just use elegant variation into oblivion to get around it, which is appalling. But at least it's kind of amusing. But the rest of them just go. The Mail completely capitulate.
Yeah, I mean, why do supposedly impartial journalists feel obliged to kind of observe what is effectively a kind of de facto blasphemy law in the kind of LGBT Stonewall community?
Yeah, one reason is because people don't want to dare break blasphemy laws, and the other reason is that media people are generally left wing, even writing for the Mail.
But it would be a bit like every time they refer to Muhammad, they have to refer to him as the Prophet Muhammad.
Peace be upon him.
It's like,
which I wouldn't mind as much, actually, by the way, as this, because at least that's respecting a religion. I could live with that more than I could live with this. All right, that's one. Here's one for you. It's a bit dry maybe, but it's Labour plan for gender change to be made easier. Just on this topic, I just thought it's like read the room, guys. Maybe Josh used that phrase on headlines, so sorry, Josh, I've stolen that. But yes, this stuff's over, but Annalise Dodds doesn't realise this. So she wants to make it easier. The party is considering how to make the legally binding certificate easier to obtain, this gender certificate, while still having the guardrails to prevent mirroring controversial proposals in Scotland. It's like, why are you focused on this? Fix the country, fix immigration, fix tax, fix inflation, fix the complete collapse of the West. But no, it's like, we didn't want to make it slightly easier for gender. I mean,
and it's such a fudge too. The gender recognition reform bill in Scotland, which ultimately did for Nicola Sturgeon, was proposing that no doctor needed to be involved in certifying a trans-identifying person as actually being legally the opposite sex to their biological sex. Whereas Labour is saying, OK, we don't need a medical panel, but we at least need a GP. As if your local GP is going to have the expertise to determine whether someone is suffering from a mental disorder or is actually, born in the wrong body. I mean, it's just ludicrous. Annalisa Dodds is one of these social justice warriors who's constantly accusing anyone who dissents from a kind of radical progressive agenda of trying to start a culture war. But, the agenda's now shift. The consensus has now shifted post-Cass, and it was already shifting before that. So she's now the one, by proposing to make it easier for people to self-ID, she's the one starting a culture war.
Yeah, well, it always is. That's their gaslighting technique. Stoking divisive culture wars. It's like, no, you're the one doing all the radical shit. We're just saying, stop, you weirdos.
We say this every week, don't we?
Yes.
So it's becoming a bit repetitive.
I love it.
So
I didn't start watching. I don't know how long we've done. So how many more have you got, Toby?
I'll do.
Only because I've got to play football.
I'll rattle through a couple more.
I love the show.
So there was this Japanese professor at SOAS in London who tried to sue SOAS in the employment tribunal for racial discrimination, because her boss, the boss of her department at SOAS, trying to make conversation one day, told her about this fantastic sushi restaurant in Camberwell, I think, where she and her family liked to go. And she really took offense at this and claimed this was racism. And she said, can you imagine if I had told her about some really good sausages I'd found in a local butcher? She would have been outraged. In fact, she turned around and said, I wouldn't have minded at all.
I love the sausages.
Yeah, but, and the employment tribunal actually got this one right and said, no, this isn't racial discrimination. You're being oversensitive about this. She was just making conversation. Talking about sushi to a Japanese person isn't out and out racism.
If it was called Miso Tasty and you did an accent, have you seen the Alan Partridge bit in Mid Morning Matters? It's called Miso Tasty, and he does a really thick Japanese accent. He goes, if you'd hear me do that, you'd probably say, Alan, I think you've just been a bit racist. You'd be absolutely right. But you'd be missing the fact that I just paid a wonderful compliment to Japanese cuisine. It's kind of, that's how I'm picturing it. He just launches into this really racist, but it wasn't racist. It was just recommending sushi to someone.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Is that it?
There were a few others.
I sound like I'm desperate to end people. Well, it's only, just for the listener, it's only because I have to play football after. I love the show. Okay. But it's quite a lot of pressure to go home and play football.
No more peak works.
Okay. Basically, we do it on the night of my football night, and I have responsibilities to them as well to make up the numbers. It's very, very tough, guys. But we've done quite a long show, I think. How long have we done? We've done a decent length show, haven't we? How long have we done, Andrew? An hour? We don't want to shortchange them, but hour 5 sounds quite long. We don't want to shortchange the beloved free listeners who, and I thank you so much for your messages saying, where was the Weekly Sceptic? Here
By the way,
it is.
Just on that you're sort of reading into that a kind of indifference to what the reason might be, including your ill health. But maybe it was just, it's nice, isn't it, that they formed an attachment to the Weekly Sceptic. They worry when it doesn't appear. They want to know why. You have them as these kind of demanding kind of children, kind of ungrateful children wanting that more gift from their parents at Christmas time. But actually, it could just be that it's a way of signalling their affection for you and the program.
Yes. That's another way to see it. Of course, it is a good thing that people love the Weekly Sceptic and want their show. But when you're struggling and you're ill and people are like, "Where's the Weekly Sceptic?" You just sort of think there's this terrible pressure that like I'm never allowed a week off ever, no matter what. You know what I mean? So that is partly the nature of podcasting. That's why I've done them at Christmas. We've done them with you on holiday. But occasionally you just think, guys, my blood pressure is high. Like I haven't eaten for a week. I'm in a health centre opened by David Lammy at 10 p.m. at night.
You know you're on death's door when you have your resort to go to a health centre opened by David Lammy. But
because I also got my health anxiety on top of the actual health problem. So imagine the two together.
Yeah, and I should say that until now you've only missed one, and that was my fault.
Yeah.
You've been an unbelievable trooper in producing these day in, week out. So you must have been very unwell to have missed.
Thank you. I was struggling, but I didn't know what it was, which is weird. But I'm eating again. I'm back, not dying, and we're back, guys. And hopefully, Toby had like so many peak works, but hopefully you don't feel annoyed. That it was 2 weeks worth of build up. So hopefully you still got some good ones. Because I just suddenly realized this is the end of the show, and I suddenly felt terrible. But that is the show. Thank you so much. It will continue to get better and better as I recover and as things go back to normal. And the studio, we will continue to bring it to new heights, I'm sure. Plugging stuff, well, go to basedmedia.org for the extra content. We'll be talking about things like Trump talking about his third term and other stuff the base department and so on. You don't even know what that is if you're a free subscriber. Well, it's where we do, it's a version of Peak Woke, but it's Peak Based. It's like, what's the most base thing of the week? You only get this if you pay for basedmedia.org, and it's only £5. It's £5 a month.
And I've got 3 nominees for the base department, and you've got 1, so
yeah, exactly.
A packed
and we
section.
get really off the hook, and we say horrible stuff. Toby's completely different. He just says horrible stuff. You need to pay for the base stuff. But yeah, it's £5 a month, £10 a month to get you some other stuff like a Zoom call, which I'll do when I'm better. And you can be a founding member if you're just rich and you want to help us out, basically. And also, go to nickdixon.net for my Substack if you're so inclined. You get all my podcast stuff. We're going to be doing extra content on my other podcast, The Current Thing. Massive episode coming up on Monday with a massive guest. We've just had Lionel Shriver. Ashley Frawley was brilliant. We've had Carl Benjamin. We've had Ben Habib. And extra content on nickdixon.net. Or if you want to make a one-off donation, buymeacoffee.com/nickdixon. You can help me buy various medicines and try plain cheese sandwiches and things like this that really help me. And what else, Toby? Anything you want to plug?
I was going to plug That's Debatable, the FSU, Free Speech Union podcast. So it's been going now for quite a while, but we've just gone visual as well as audio. So it's now available not just on your favorite podcasting platform, but it's also available on YouTube. It's a 45-minute podcast. A couple of staffers at the Free Speech Union, Tom Harris and Ben Jones, jointly host that, and they sometimes interview people. They talk about the cases we've been dealing with in the past week. It's a really good podcast. So if you want to check that out, it's That's Debatable, but search for, there are lots of podcasts called That's Debatable. So search for That's Debatable and Free Speech Union, and you'll pull it up on your favorite podcasting platform or on YouTube. So go check that out.
I'd have involved Free Speech Union in the name somehow, but then I'm not involved in that one. I'm guessing, though, without listening to it, that it's a rip-off of all my innovations on the Weekly Sceptic. Is it?
Well, it's
yeah, I can tell already it is from your tone of voice. See, I innovated. I made all these innovations. I said, this is how you do a podcast, Toby. Bang, bang, bang. Brought in all these sections. Peak Woke was yours, but the whole concept of sections was mine. I said, this is how you shape a podcast. Now you've taken that model. You're going to copy it for Daily Skeptic. You're going to copy it for FSU. Am I right?
Well,
and pay me nothing.
You are a visionary innovator, Nick, and I think one of the prices you pay for that is that people will replicate your work.
And I invented trigonometry. I'm the king of podcasts. One day people will recognize. Sorry, anyway, listen to That's Debatable on all platforms. And anything else you want to
produce a rant?
Anything else you want to play? Yeah, no, I'm sure it's great. I'm sure it's great. And I like. Is it Tom that does it?
Yeah.
And Tom's great, so I'm sure it's great. I don't want to diss That's Debatable. Everyone should listen to it. And what else, Toby?
Just if you enjoy the Daily Skeptic content, please become a subscriber for £5 a month, and you can comment beneath the articles. That's dailyskeptic.org/donate/ and what else? If you're not yet a member of the Free Speech Union, go to freespeechunion.org/join/ and do join. We need all the help we can get as we face an incoming Labour supermajority.
Okay, I just realised people will say, "Oh, Nick's got a big ego." There's one review that said I had a big ego, which I think is so wrong. I mean, it also said I was self-loathing. It's like, yeah, you can't be both, can you? And then it said I was like a potential school shooter, and I was like, who would go back into a school at 42? Like, where am I just finding local schools? And because school shooters, right?
Found one opened by David Lammy.
Yeah, school shooters, they're killing their peers because they've got a resentment against them. No one who's like 40 goes like, I'm just going to find a school. Go here. Who are the worst kids here? How would it even work logistically? I was like, then I realized he said mass shooter, which is slightly different, and I've just gone on this whole mental rant for no reason. But imagine a review that calls me a mass shooter. Imagine how horrible that is. And I was like, where's the Weekly Sceptic, Nick? This thing that I do for barely any profit, barely any reason, this thankless task I do for almost 2 years, giving of my soul and all my creativity. And then people are like, you know what, Nick's like a mass shooter. This is what I have to put up with doing this podcast. I mean,
I'm going to give you a piece of advice that was once given to
me
by Matthew Freud. When Matthew Freud was the kind of king of PR back in the day, and I just published How to Lose Friends and Alienate People. And I said, it's getting a lot of publicity, but I'm not sure whether it's good or bad. And he said, don't read it, weigh it.
Yeah. Well, this is just, I don't read reviews anymore because they're so hurtful, but I occasionally... Then the next one liked me and not you, but this one was so brutal. It was just like, I accidentally read it when I was walking around. Imagine calling someone a mash. Imagine how horrible that is. And I think it also called me an incel, which I really resent because I've had lots of opportunities, as I always say, with very attractive women, and I've just really not gone for a lot of them because I'm a weirdo. I'm something even weirder than an insult, which is far worse. I was in the other day. No, maybe I shouldn't say that. No, I don't know. I was in a building the other day, and I realised I'd been out with 2 of the women in the building.
Really?
And they were both attractive, and I'd not been into. I'd sort of let it slide because I'm an idiot. But you can't say I'm an incel, therefore, because I had these chances. I'm a recluse.
Yeah,
I'm a MGTOW.
You're a voluntary celibate instead of an involuntary celibate.
It's called men going their own way. So let's just get that.
You're just a cell.
Yeah, let's get that clear. That's a much more disturbing thing to be, because it's like I'm a weird kind of monk-like person who for some reason can't.
You're the reason we're the reason we have the fertility crisis. You could be making lots of babies, but you're electing not to. Come on, Nick, you need to do your part.
Yeah. Well, women need to stop being so mental. There, meet me halfway. All right, I just thought I'd end the podcast with make myself late with a terrible rant that got me in trouble on multiple levels. Pointing out people calling me mass shooter, was horrible about the FSU podcast, was egotistical, called myself some sort of weirdo with relationships. But that's why people listen.
How many people were you convinced by? I'm not an incel. I can have as many attractive women as I want. I'm dating 2 of the women in my building. I'm not an incel.
I'm not though. That's the annoying thing. But anyway, my ex-girlfriend was beautiful. But we can talk about it again. We'll do a separate show on that. Nick's ex-girlfriend. There's only about 4. It'll be quite a short show, but it'll prove once and for all. Anyway, you're right. Doth protest too much and all that shit. Thank you very much for listening. That was the free part of the Weekly Sceptic. Basedmedia.org for the rest. But for everyone else, God bless you. And until next week, stay skeptical.
Stay skeptical.